But anyway, that was an impressive thing. The Cholula pyramid. So that's episode 2, I think. So that, I mean, that apparently is the largest structure ever anywhere. The one with the church on top, which is, you know, the typical kind of conquistador, we're the winners, build a church on top of it kind of mentality. I mean, that was another one with all the hidden caverns, but that was apparently built on top of a sacred spring, which so there's that water connection, which goes to the pyramids in Giza as well, and plenty of others, and the sort of dedication to Tlaloc, who's known as Chak in the Mayan sort of pantheon. But I don't know. It's like one minute I'm looking at it and it's quite compelling, and I'm thinking, oh, this all sort of makes sense, and then again I sort of draw back and think, yeah, but he's connecting a lot of dots which aren't really connected here.
Which is fine as long as you've then got you then produce some evidence to back up your connections, and I think that's probably what's drawing a lot of the criticism. Is it's quite surface. It's a surface reading, and I think if he actually came back with additional evidence and potentially, some other sorts of scientists backing him up, I think that would be better.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff which seems to be just put in there, like the advanced civilization. You know, how advanced? There's no discussion around how advanced they were. You know, were they on the level of, say, the Phoenicians or the Romans, medieval period? You know, were they more advanced than us? There's no time or space given to that. But you know, you think if you've conjured this thing up, then you kind of owe it to us to explain, you know, what you think they were like, how advanced they were. I mean, they would have been able to have circumnavigate the globe in ships, for instance, which is fairly advanced. I mean, the Romans couldn't do that. I think if they'd have put their minds to it, they could have done it, but they obviously didn't need to, because everything pretty much within their wheelhouse was in the Mediterranean, the Near East, or, you know, the massive extremity of Britannia. They didn't go any further than that, that we know of. That, so, you know, but I think with their technology, they probably could have built ships. I mean, if you can build ships that can go from, you know, Europe to the Americas in the 1400s, with the civilization that they had then, which I would think in many ways was inferior to Rome, despite being, you know, hundreds of years later. There's no reason why they couldn't have done that, I suppose. So they could have been Roman level. They could have been. There's some sort of alternative history theories that the Greeks made it to the Americas and all of that sort of stuff as well, and mined copper, and even had you know, sort of semi-permanent colonies there and all that sort of stuff. Although obviously nothing's been found really of any significance. I mean, but the Norse made it to the Americas in, you know, 1000 AD by sort of island hopping across the north from Iceland to Greenland to, you know, Baffin Island and all that sort of thing in Labrador in Canada. So I suppose they wouldn't have to be that advanced, really. I mean, a longship is a wonderful piece of, you know, engineering, but it's not a super advanced way of traveling by any stretch of the imagination.
No, and that's kind of the point, isn't it? And also, so many of these things were made of wood, so anything made of wood is obviously long since gone, and you get very little evidence, because actually, you know, earlier civilizations, particularly the ones before they had kind of metallurgy and that kind of thing, everything's made out of wood and rope and a lot of other, you know, compostable, biodegradable, substances.
Unless they'd ended up in a peat bog or something like that and been preserved. But you know, that's a bit sort of astronomical, really, isn't it? We've found a few of these, and they've been kind of 1,000,000-to-1 shots, really, bog bodies and all that sort of stuff. but I know there's this he does this thing, I think, where he preempts the criticism. I don't know if he's necessarily heard it so many times that he's just part of his sort of patter, or if he's kind of setting up a straw man to defeat. So one of them is the where is all their trash kind of question, you know. So if there was an advanced civilization, why have we not found the equivalent of their Coke bottles and all of their rubbish, which wouldn't biodegrade for thousands of years? It's like, but you know, his answer to that is, well, who's to say they're using plastics?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is I probably would have said exactly the same thing to that particular criticism. It's kind of,
it's an easy one to defeat, though, isn't it? And that's the point. Is it
easy to defeat?
What came first, the rebuttal or the criticism?
Oh yeah, of course, and he is very defensive. But
he is. I think that's to his detriment, because I think he's got this. I mean, I've followed his sort of career, I suppose, for a while, and I remember seeing interviews of him, you know, in the past when he sort of looked younger and had more hair, and I don't know why he just seemed less believable then. You know, when they're older, they're kind of kindly old guy, and you sort of think, oh yeah, you're making a good point, and I think he could have leaned more into that if he, but then maybe they're already eyeing a sort of second season where he's going to go into some more of these details with, you know, how advanced he thinks the civilization is and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, I don't know where else you can go really apart from there.
I mean, perhaps. I mean, this is a slight aside, but off the back of this, I mean, he's done well out of me. I started reading his book America before.
Yeah.
So that I've only flicked through it so far, but funnily enough, the depth is very similar, I suppose. But again,
I've downloaded that. I've not started yet.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the examples in there are very similar. Obviously, pretty much all of it is based on the whole of the Americas, so North and South America, suggesting that, again, it's the same, obviously, theory that giving various examples of how humans were inhabiting certain parts of it, or just obviously had greater technology than we, assume they did. But again, they're kind of a little bit kind of leapy, I suppose. I mean, one of the examples is to do with in the Amazon, basically the man-made soil that they found in the Amazon with this really
terra preta.
Yeah, exactly. So they're saying that, like, it's well beyond that. It's he claims that it's a complex collection of various things, like it's animal and human bodily waste, along with, like, fish bones and household waste, so bits of kind of ceramics and that kind of
burning
thing.
And all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, and he claims that it has to be burned in a certain way, very specific, unusual way, that you can't. It has to smolder instead of fully burn. And then he does, obviously, it's funny enough, he does exactly the same thing where he says, well, it could have been accidental. Yeah, you could have just stumbled across it. But he then says, well, it's more likely that it was deliberate, and obviously, given that a lot of the soil in the Amazon was not particularly fertile, you'd have to develop something like that in order to have an efficient agricultural system.
Well, the term is that the Amazon's a garden, isn't it? It's not natural. It is man-made. It's the Amazon rainforest is a garden, according to people who subscribe to that sort of theory, because on its own it is useless for kind of growing crops and things like that. I mean, obviously, obviously it's for a different purpose, but that's why, when they want to have the farming there, they just clear it all out, don't they, to our detriment. But I mean, that's one of the other things. He didn't really mention it that much in this series, did he? The terra preta and all that sort of thing. That's because I remember seeing him talking about that on Joe Rogan. So I suppose he could sort of concentrate a lot more on the Amazon next time, because I know he's very keen into that, and he's certainly very, very keen on talking about all of the various substances that they use to communicate with, whatever it is they're communicating with, advanced civilizations, their gods, and all that sort of stuff, which is another one of his areas of interest, I suppose. But which one of the episodes that you've seen? You mentioned the first one. I mean, which ones have you found that have been a bit far fetched, shall we say?
I mean, to be honest, after the first one, it kind of they kind of slipped a bit after that for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I pick a particular one. I think you know what it was. I think after the first one, I was just in the zone with it. I was like, I was just kind of going with it. I think I was far more critical with the first one.
Yeah.
And then kind of assumed I was like, okay, I know what I'm in for now. I mean, were there any particular ones that you thought you've gone absolutely mental?
What he has? No,
yeah, not you.
yeah. Well, might have done. I think it would. I think where he suffers is that rather than sort of pose some questions, so point out some contradictions, and allow mainstream archaeology to react, or allow the viewer to make up their minds or do their own research or whatever it is. He seems to have taken it upon himself, and I know he's been doing it for a number of years working on this kind of theory, but he seems to have taken it upon himself to have formed an entire narrative. And so what happened was, there was this advanced civilization. The world has reached its kind of zenith before. Then suddenly, the ice age ended, and everything went to pot, and all of the rivers and seas and everything, and swallowed up massive amounts of the land, which is true. The flooding, that is not necessarily the advanced civilization, but he then goes into the sort of the episodes in Turkey, with the underground sort of ant colony warren that they found, which is an incredible thing to see. But he sort of put that into how he sort of says that some of the temples, or indeed all of the temples, are aligned with Sirius in Malta, and that's a warning to future generations that the comets are going to come, and they're going to. So therefore, that's the people in Turkey have dug under the ground and formed their underground city, and it's all kind of, and then this and then that, and then this and then that, rather than, this is weird, isn't it? How do we explain that? We can't really. I have a bit of a theory about this particular thing, but he seems to have formed this entire. I mean, it's an incredible story. It's very inventive, but it just strikes me as being something which didn't need to be like that. And each episode is kind of, it's like unpeeling an onion. You sort of you see a bit of the onion, you go, that's all right. With episode 1, for instance, you go, wow, that's really believable, and that's very interesting, and all that sort of thing. And then you kind of get sucked further and further in, and by the end, you are believing that this, the Göbekli Tepe pillars are star maps, and they're predicting when the next meteor is going to come. And I don't know if it's because I might have nodded off a bit here and there, but I've struggled to have followed that through to that conclusion based on what I saw.
And it is probably because it is just kind of, he's obviously he's decided to take this slightly more sensationalist approach to it, obviously, and that's probably how he's got his Netflix documentary in the first place. And the book I referenced earlier does exactly the same thing. And I mean, unfortunately, it had already popped into my mind, but the article I mentioned earlier, that was on will be unnamed newspaper's website, says that the show closely resembles the sort of half-baked documentary that one of the lesser Discovery channels would slap up at 3 a.m. It's like, unfortunately, it does sort of turn into a bit of that. It's like, we're aliens at the first Thanksgiving kind of.
I mean, I was glad after watching the first episode that it didn't go full Ancient Aliens, because I was half expecting it might do. Sort of, how did this happen? Aliens, right? Next episode. So thankfully it didn't do that. But I mean, I don't want to criticize it too much because I thought it was good, and I think it had, and I don't think it's dangerous like that article you referenced
No,
claims.
that's insane.
I think that's crazy to say that. I think that's kind of more out there than his kind of theory, really, because I think he's devoted a lot of time to this. I don't think he's just in it for the cash, really, because whilst he's written a lot of books and they've done reasonably well. The most successful one he had, I think, was Fingerprints of the Gods or something. I think that was in the early 90s or something like that. So it was a bit of a sensation then, but obviously he kind of, fallen out of the national consciousness for quite some time. I don't know if this concentration on America is hoping to reignite that, because obviously, if you go on Joe Rogan, you can't just say all of this stuff's over there in Europe. You've got to have some stuff that tourists can go and have a look at closer to home, haven't you, really? So I don't know. I mean, I don't like to accuse him of cynicism in that sense. I think it's just if you keep looking for something, you eventually start seeing it everywhere, and I think there's some of that.
Well, he comes across as a kind of person that, I don't think there's anything kind of sinister there. I think it's simply that he genuinely believes. I think he genuinely believes he stumbled across something that's amazing, and he's now obviously done quite reasonably well out of telling other people that. And I think the problem is that leap of storytelling, which is tricky, isn't it? Because a story will draw people in and get people listening to it, and to the point that we made quite early on, it engages people in the subject matter and ideally gets people researching and that kind of thing. But then, of course, you're going to attract a lot of negative attention by doing that. Which is a shame, because I think we've spoken.
The story's got to be good as well, hasn't it? And that's the point. So to engage people, you do have to do a bit of embellishment, possibly.
So the question is, would you have been as engaged? Well, maybe you're a bad example, but would this have been as engaging without the embellishment? If he was literally spent 8 episodes going to various places and going, there's a tiny bit of evidence that something is not quite what we think, and then moving on.
Yeah, I get your point. Obviously, it wouldn't have flowed as well either, and obviously, there is that through line of his narrative, which is a great story. I think hopefully that great story does lead people to see history in a more enlightened way, perhaps, but not necessarily his way. I definitely think that I wouldn't let the archaeologists, if we're going to lump them all into one category. Obviously, there are many with very different opinions on a lot of different things, and they're not a homogenous group at all. But I think that some of the more established ones, for instance, probably do have some work to do in answering some of these questions now. I don't think they can ever really sit there and say, well, our work is done.